Is it okay? Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Kamani, licensed clinical psychologist. Thank you for tuning in today. We are having a part two about human resources. Is human resources gaslighting me? Okay. I'm sure many of you have had a similar experiences as me in relation to human resources. And because we had such a lively conversation last time, we're having a part two with our special guest today. So we're going to have a conversation. I am going to be more mindful of time this time around, and that will stop at like a 40-minute mark just to kind of check in for Q&A, okay? So I'm going to turn it over to my guests to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go right into the conversation. So Charmaine, I'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I am Charmaine, founder and CEO of Chapter 2 LLC, which is a talent and business optimization consultancy, leveraging inclusivity, so cognitive, behavioral, and emotional intelligence insights to improve business results.
Thank you, Charmaine. Dr. Claire.
Hi, I am Dr. Claire. I am founder and CEO of Dr. Claire Speaks LLC and also partner with Char in Chapter 2. Dr. Claire Speaks is a consultancy that focuses at the intersection of mental health, racial and social justice, DEI, and health equity, all because I am a racial and social justice warrior and firmly believe that in order to move our nation through our challenges, we have to truly center health equity because health is wealth.
Indeed. Well, again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. So we're going to go right into the conversation. So wondering for both of you, have you ever had an experience in which you were gaslighted by HR, and or you experienced other people being gaslighted by HR? So I'm opening up to either one of you to answer first.
I can go.
Okay.
Yes, the 20-year career in HR, I'm saying firmly yes, absolutely. I have friends in HR who have. I know employees who have been. I don't think there's any place that I've been that I can't think of someone who has said that they've had an experience where they felt that they went for help and were made to feel as though they were the one with the problem, right?
Yes.
So it happens. I'm even thinking of one organization that I experienced a lot of toxicity at. I even found out my first week, I want to say it was probably day 2 or 3 on the job, that I was being paid 15%, actually more than 15% less than a non-Black colleague who started as the same day I did.
Wow.
And because I know sometimes as people, we like to further gaslight each other by attempting to justify why someone may have had an experience. And by the way, we need to stop doing that.
Yes.
I'll provide a little bit more context. Our roles were the same. I had actually a couple more years of experience under my belt. And in fact, the group that I supported was larger and more complex. This is the same organization, again, first week, where I came across something that had been written and shared widely that admitted that Black employees at the organization had been subjected to discriminatory practices, gaslighted and biased. The admission came with several examples of incidences that Black employees had endured, and it even went further to talk about specifically what Black people in HR were experiencing by HR. So, right. So imagine this is week 1 on the job, all the panic that's ensuing inside of me, lots of thoughts. And I'm also now sitting there debating, wait a minute, I don't like that I'm being paid less, but I now need to speak up potentially to advocate for myself to the same hiring manager who was non-Black, who made the decision to do that in the first place, right? So a lot happened. It was a foreshadowing of a lot of discrimination I would face. My health started tanking. And, my doctors were pleading with me within 4 to 6 months, like, we don't know what's going on, but this isn't healthy for you. So absolutely, I faced it when I tried to talk, I'm HR trying to talk to other HR people about it, like HR for HR, gaslighted up the wazoo, and even colleagues. And I will say, and this is something that I've seen in some of your past videos, even Black colleagues, even though they were seeing it themselves and it wasn't just me, oh, we'll just try to do it for the money and put your head down. So it's being encouraged, even though they were acknowledging that it was a negative situation and toxic, they were encouraging that I should stay and deal with it. So absolutely have been gaslit, absolutely have experienced the toxicity, absolutely have seen other people. And friends have experienced the same.
Yeah, and I want to say this, Charmaine, in terms of, you referenced my other videos in terms of all skin folk and kinfolk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes other Black people, we think that they're going to have our back or support us, and they're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's so disturbing about that is that they knew the
Mm-hmm.
oppression was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted you to be complicit in your own oppression, and then
Yeah.
you're in HR, so you're thinking, well, these should be my colleagues to help me. So nobody's there to help you, right? So feeling very much alone.
Yeah. And
Wow.
Dr. Care will add one more thing, that I also witnessed at that same organization, a white colleague who attempted to extend their privilege by speaking up about what they viewed as targeted and unfair and discriminatory treatment of Black employees, to include Black employees in HR, become a target of harm and retaliation themselves. So what we need to understand is that these systems of harm will go against their own to ensure their survival.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that, right? Before I go to Dr. Claire, in terms of the whole system is toxic, right? So it's not just one or two people, it's the whole system. And yes, the system will try to preserve the system. So they'll push out or punish anyone who challenges that system. So thank you for sharing that. What about you, Dr. Claire?
I mean, there's too many examples to even think of. I mean, yes, I have been gaslit by HR. I've also been incredibly harmed by HR and lied to by HR and misled by HR and stonewalled by HR and, seeking help, became a hindrance because of HR.
Right.
So I think that we have to really recognize and reckon with the fact, again, similar to what we spoke about 2 weeks ago, is that we're talking about people. Despite the fact we're talking about systems, we're talking about people. And there's a tendency, even brain-wise, for sameness. And so if I benefit from this system of harm in some way, whether it's prestige, status, financial, benefits on the side, whatever that is, I, as an individual, may maintain that. But similar to the example that Shar just gave, even when a colleague who may be identified as an ally acted in allyship, which is co-conspirating, not just being an ally, they then were subject to the same system of harm that is typically targeted towards the global majority and other marginalized communities. And so what that does is reinforce, should you buck against the system, even if you are one of us, we will sacrifice the one to keep the other 100 in line. And that is so grounded in supremacy culture and slavery holistic mentality, right? That those people have a lack of understanding of the connections between the harms that are enacted in these spaces and connections to human trafficking and human subjugation and human abuses, which have long happened, but particularly in America, in the American context, this is America. And so I think we clearly have these conversations about HR being harmful well above that. Like I said, there's way too many examples to even list. And they're also traumatizing. Again, similar to what we discussed last week when we were talking about keeping receipts. Sometimes that process is so daunting because of the literal post-traumatic stress disorder. And I often say, I make up my own terms. I don't say post-traumatic stress disorder. Post indicates something has passed. And if we think of the new classifications in DSM in terms of stress-induced disorders, where post-traumatic stress disorder is, or formerly, are part of the anxiety disorders, it's not post if it's still happening. It's an ongoing traumatic stress disorder. And so what happens when it's an ongoing traumatic stress disorder, and then when the systems that are supposed to be in place to help mitigate those are actually the systems that are harming, how much worse that is. There's a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And then you feel a sense of despair. And so now we're going into the pieces of depression and anxiety and your own gaslighting. And I know that we're going to talk more tonight, deeper dive in terms of the actual health implications. But I think it is so important for us to recognize that the system was created by people and people maintain these. And what often doesn't happen is all of the people who are harmed do not come together to say, hey, this is a problem, because we each think of our jobs, normal, how are we going to feed our families, normal, where are we going to live, normal. But the system knows if we could sacrifice one or two, that's fine. But should now 30 people come at the same time, that is not something that can be ignored. And so, and it's human nature to expect the groupthink, right? Oh, the other person's
Yeah.
going to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
absolutely harmed. But I think we have to go deeper in understanding the implications for this harm, and also understanding how it shows up in us and how it's showing up in other people. HR made up of humans too, right? And Charmaine did a great job last week of highlighting several times, we're not anti-HR. We're talking about people. We are talking about humans. Just as there are amazing plumbers that you're like, yes, please come fix my pipe. There are plumbers that you're like, you caused a bigger issue and now my whole house is flooded. And so we have to recognize that people, just because they have a title, does not mean that they enact and work in that space and capacity in a way that is healing or helpful or any of those things.
Right. And I just want to speak to several things you said too, Dr. Claire, in terms of recognizing that the system is engaged in oppressive practices, right? And they engage in these practices to incite fear, right, within the individual, but also the group, because individuals, these things are happening and there's a fear base, right, which is very reality based, because a lot of times you're gaslit and there's retaliation, right? Then the other thing is that when you see these things happening to someone, the group is going to look at that and say, uh-oh, not me, or I can't jeopardize that. I have a family, or all those different things, but it's a way to control us. And then the whole all skin folk and kinfolk, so the whole divide and conquer, right? So all these different oppressive strategies. And Dr. Claire, you also talked about, just the mental health implications, right? So in terms of the trauma, it's not post, because it's ongoing traumatization. And when you think about trauma, it's the depression, the anxiety, all that internalized stuff, the hypervigilance, right? So now you're always looking around you. You don't know who you can trust, right? So if you say that somebody's acting weird, well, what have you done to contribute to that, right? How has the system contributed to that? Okay. So I'm wondering, now that we've talked a little bit about being gaslit, I just want to share this personally, briefly, my own trauma experience with HR, right? So when we were talking, audience, we were planning for this conversation, I was like, we need to talk about this, because I still feel the sting of what happened when I went to HR. And, I think the problem is that many people go to HR and we're told to go to HR. When we have a problem at the job, we're told to go to HR, right? So I'm going to HR. I'm, going with all my documentation. I'm thinking I'm going to get support. I'm supposed to be talking to one man. I get there, in the room, it's two other women, right? And it turned into, I'm trying to share about my experiences for support. And it turned into, what was I doing or something? And I was like, what just happened here? So it's, when you think about what happens in a traumatic situation, is it distorts your sense of reality, right? And it starts to make you question, am I seeing this right? Or what's happening here, right? So why am I defensive or on defense when I'm coming for help, right? So that's a form of trauma. And you start questioning, did I not say my point correctly? Or, I came in for one thing and now I'm being harmed again by HR. So I just want to connect to the audience in terms of why I thought this topic was so important. So Charmaine, can you talk a little bit in terms of, because again, I think the perception is that when you have a problem, you go to HR, right? I think we need to have some clarity in terms of really understanding what is the role of HR, just so we have that understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And before I answer this, forgot to, mention at the top, some of the things that we're going to talk about are going to be triggering. So we want to make sure that
Yes.
everyone is centering their own health and wellness. If you need to tap out, please do that, right? We are talking about toxic work environments. We're talking about harm. We're talking about seeking help and then being harmed by that place that you're seeking help from, right? So
Yes.
that is something that we want to acknowledge. And also our nephew, who is 2, is on this call. So hi, Luca, we love you.
Hi, baby Luca.
Right. So specific to the role of HR, right? The other way we could say this is HR's role to gaslight me. Short answer is no, it should not be that, right? At least not in the job descriptions I've seen, right? But as we all three acknowledged, it's happened to us where we have been gaslit even by HR. And for me, being in HR, right, and having that experience, right? So I want to acknowledge that it can absolutely feel like that, right? And even what you experienced. I think as HR professionals, and if any of you are on the call, one of the things that we can do a much better job about is explaining to people what the process might look like, right? So when someone has come to me, I have never said to them, if they say, oh, I need to tell you this, you can't tell anyone else. You are both, healthcare practitioners, you're mandated reporters. For me, it's the same type of thing. If you tell me something that, well, a good HR professional, let me just put that out there. If you tell me something that is discriminatory, it's like if you are aware of abuse in your practice and don't report it, right? You're obligated to do so. So I have never promised confidentiality to people. I think that being anonymous and confidential, people get those things confused sometimes. What I have always told people is, to the best extent possible, I will do so, but I cannot make that guarantee. So, and the example that I will give is, Dr. K, if something happened between the two of us and then HR came to you, you are a rational human. You may just assume, well, the only person I had this issue or this thing happened with was Charmaine. It has to be her.
Yeah.
That happens often. And then HR gets blamed. And it's like, well, no, I didn't say anything. That person just, by reasoning, deduced that you may have been involved, right? So to go back to the question of what is HR supposed to do? Not supposed to gaslight, right? But again, a lot of it, and what we talked about a lot last time, and I want to acknowledge, HR, we're not bad people, right? But the experiences that other people have, or we can have with HR, can make us feel that way. Again, HR are employees too. They are trying to navigate the systems. And as I shared before, there have been many times where I've said, not recommending this. Nope, that one looks like we're going right over the cliff. My role is risk mitigation advisement, but if someone doesn't take it. So HR, in short, should be responsible for the full life cycle, which is a real term if you want to Google it, employee life cycle, by the way, of the employee experience, right? So that encompasses everything from recruiting and everything that someone experiences, their training, development, their compensation, their benefits, until they offboard. Is that full cycle. But the role is grounded in development and enablement of people, processes, tools, policies, and in support of the organization and in support of the employees, right? Because you're trying to walk that balance. But HR is spearheading a lot of efforts, but not owning all of them, right? So I want people to think of this more as an orchestra where everyone must contribute. It's meant to be horizontal, not a vertical function, but really about the entire company, the policies, the processes, the people. And that, by the way, is going to look different at every single company because of how the company is structured. I have found with some companies, as spoke to someone recently, if they have had a more administrative role, then people are like, oh, well, HR answers benefits questions. If you are at a different place that's more about strategy development and execution and looking at the bigger picture and how to align business goals, you're going to have a different experience. So there is no one size fits all for what you're going to experience within HR, but HR, no matter where they are, should be helping to usher processes along that relate to people.
And it's interesting, Charmaine, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, I think many of us have not experienced that whole life cycle of HR, right? Like we might experience in terms of the recruitment, the interviewing, and then when we, or if we come in for a problem, the gaslighting, and then once we leave, right? But the part about the development, the training, really trying to pour into employees, I don't think many of us have experienced that, honestly, right?
Yeah.
So, I remember when we were having conversations in terms of planning this call or this talk, Dr. Claire, you talked about HR hurt, and that just spoke to my soul. Can you share with the audience, what did you mean by HR hurt?
Yes, it is my term, so don't you guys try to take it without credit. So
I'll credit you.
Thank you very much. I'm talking to all the audiences. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, how I define HR hurt is a real sense of hurt and betrayal and emotional dysregulation connected to the real or perceived experience between the incongruence of the vulnerability that you shared and the expectations of being supported with the reality of HR perhaps using that information against you, using it to harm you, and using it as a way to exit you from the organization. And it can also be a function of being gaslit by HR, where your experiences are minimized. And in some of the cases, honestly, what that I experienced and why I even came up with the term HR hurt years ago was, and even still, experiencing HR actually being part of the people that target you. So, for example, if you speak up in the organization, it's the HR team that's actually looking like who said what, experiencing when people do employee culture surveys where the leadership, including HR, trying to figure out who said what so they can single out those people and punish them. It is HR, being the ones that are pushing, yes, write this person up. And it's not necessarily for performance, but it's because the person is seen as a problem. And the problem usually means that they speak up too much. They're calling out injustices. They're calling out inequitable treatment. And then HR is the maintainer of the status quo versus working to ensure that the status quo is dismantled to ensure equity for everyone and safety in the workspace while balancing, of course, the needs of the organization. But I will always say that the needs of the organism, us as humans, should always go before the needs of the organization, because the organism makes up the organization.
True. And also when you talked about that sense of betrayal, right?
Absolutely.
So that you're asking for my perspective, right? I'm sharing it, and then you're using that against me and to be targeted, right? And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because I think a lot of us have had these experiences, right? But then we self gaslight ourselves and say, no, HR wouldn't do that, or no, they wouldn't do that because they asked for my opinion, right? But to say, no, this stuff really happens. So I'm wondering, as we're talking about, these toxic work environments and being gaslit by HR, what have you guys seen in terms of the impact of being in a toxic work environment? Because I know I've been doing videos for about a year on YouTube, right? Looking at some kind of consulting wellness services, please subscribe, right? So what have you guys observed or experienced in terms of the impact of a toxic work environment?
Yeah. I can go first. And, one thing, Claire, that you said in terms of HR, and I want to just drive home, I'm an advocate for this field. This is my chosen profession, right? And there are a lot of good people. Good people make bad mistakes sometimes. And if you're in a system that is not responsive to what you may be suggesting, there's nothing you can do about it unless you decide you're going to leave there, right? Just like I said last week, I've never made a compensation decision for anyone at a company unless it was someone that was working for me, right? So even if we are saying, please don't do X, it doesn't mean, but HR gets attached to the processes. Like I said, someone's being exited. Now I may be in the room, well, years ago, right? I may be in the room because from legal reasons, they want to make sure someone's there to go through paperwork, but I didn't make the decision about terminating that employee, right? And I want to make sure that that's understood, because it's very easy to bucket, well, HR did X.
Yes.
HR didn't make the decision. How we show up in execution, because I won't even say support, because there are times where I was just executing, even though nothing about my being supported what was happening, right? So I want to just make that clear. In terms of, the type of impacts, like you said, things happen, the retaliation, you see people being further gaslit, you see things, managers and the organizations question their commitment, right? And then it goes into, they're not a culture fit. I despise that
culture
term.
fit.
I despise that term, because for me, what culture fit says is you're not like me, therefore you don't belong here. And I really wish more people and collectively the organizations would stop talking about we're looking for culture fit, because there's so much bias and discrimination even laden in that thinking, right? So, one of the challenges I had at that company I was talking about is people who really know me know that I'm an introvert. Doing something like this takes a lot out of me, right? So, and I'm an observer. So when I'm getting to know anyone or in any process, it takes me a while, because someone that used to work with me before is just like, Shar, your brain is like numbers and letters. Like you're layering everything together. So I look at things that way, and people would read me not sharing my thoughts initially as, oh, she's not engaged or committed. No, my brain wants the lay of the land. And once I have that, I will lean in more, but not being afforded that, because culturally you might have people who are a lot more extroverted. And I think we need to make space for different types. It gets very overwhelming for me to be put on the spot, especially when I don't have information. So again, I want to make sure that we are clear on the fact that some of the same things that companies are using against people to say, oh, well, it's not a fit, are discriminatory even in the way that we're approaching it.
True.
Yeah, right. So impacts. Complaints start to come in from managers, right? All of a sudden, someone needs to be on a PIP, which is a performance improvement plan. Now, me personally, I have debated with, and debated is the right word, with many people when they've told me they want to put someone in a PIP. Do not waste my time and energy and wanted me to coach you, meaning a manager, when ultimately you want to fire this person. Because PIPs are often used, and I think I saw A. Marie talk about this.
Marie Archer.
Talk about this too.
Yes.
On your channel. These are used as legal defenses. That's it, right? I want a document trail, meaning the company, to make sure. So if you have been surprised by a PIP after getting glowing performance reviews, bonuses, all of these things, stop and think about what's going on that may have caused this. Did you say something to upset someone, right? Because maybe you called out something. Sometimes people's performance is slipping, and I want to acknowledge it happens. But if I'm in an environment where I'm not being honored and I feel uncomfortable, well, my performance starting to be impacted is going to be a result of that, right? I wish sometimes we would lean in a little bit more to say, is there anything happening organizationally or experientially within this company that could be contributing, right? So
absolutely.
But impact is punishment is what starts to happen, right? And the last thing I want to add here, and for any HR people on the call or leaders on this call, please stop using coaching as a method to fix performance issues. It is seen as punitive to an employee when you say, we're just going to get a coach, or this person needs a coach. Oh, they're not performing. Stop doing that. Coaching should not be something that's used as a way to say something is wrong with you, so you need this, right? It doesn't feel good.
Right.
So we should, just the same way that HR doesn't feel good when HR shows up to some people, because there's a negative connotation associated with it. So I would say, do not use coaching as a form of punishment for people. In my career, I have never seen that work out positively, because the coaching experience is meant to help someone develop, feel empowered, move forward in the areas of their life. So
and it's supposed to be strengths-based, not deficit-based.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And by the way, deficits are being defined by people who have their own biases, which is another reason, warning for all the people in the call. As a professional, I despise the performance review process, because there is no way to make this bias free. That's my personal view. 2 decades, I don't see it happening, because we're talking about people with their own biases evaluating other people.
Yes. And I'm so glad, I'm get you 1 second, Dr. Claire. I'm so glad you talked about the PIP, the performance improvement plan. So when you think about that, and when you think about so-called coaching, the double message in that, right? So most people would think that means, oh, they're trying to help me improve in certain areas, but no, they're really trying to get you out, right? And then if they say, oh, I'm going to give you coaching, you're thinking, oh, you want to, again, but they're looking like, no, this is because you are problematic, or you're not meeting certain standards, right? So that confusing message, I think that's very disturbing. I think it's deceitful in many ways.
Like you said, deficit based. So I'm a coach, I'm a certified coach, right? And I believe in that process, but I do not believe in that process when I'm telling someone, because I think something's wrong with you, this is what you need to do. I'd rather someone say, hey, I want to help you and I want to work with you. I'm just gonna make this up. From a technical perspective, we need people who can do A, B, and C. We're seeing that you are having a challenge with A and B. What would support look like for you in that, right? That having that conversation, what I've seen is people say, there's an issue, you just need a coach, and that feels punitive to someone, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what I want us to think about how are we offering this up? Because in the same way, if that person was performing well and you said, oh my goodness, we should get you a coach to help you develop further, we're sending people double messages when the same person is being sent in to elevate and also fix, air quote.
Yes, exactly. What about you, Dr. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I love so much of what you said, Char. I love the fact that you discussed the challenges with not being open and upfront with people around even what coaching is. And that's where part of the HR hurt comes in and the betrayal, because a tool that is typically seen as something helpful is now used as a harm when we talk earlier about using the targeted approach. Because my thing is that if you believe coaching was helpful, that would have been something you offered to all of your new employees within the first 6 months or whatever it is, right? Like whatever it is, like it would have been something that's available to all people. And I don't believe in this only senior leaders should get coaching, because we're all at a point of our lives where we can grow and learn. And also you're talking about an inclusive process. So this is where we're getting into the DEIJ, which is something that both Shar and I care a lot about, is the inclusive process of what looks helpful for you. What are the areas that you think you need to grow in? What are the areas that we need to help you in? Or what are the areas that you're like, you know what, this is not my gifting. And so we need some other people with that gifting to come in, because often what is happening, and again, as I said last week, 2 weeks ago when we had this call, I've never had a job where I have not been harmed. I've had the jobs where it is, you're not doing enough, despite the fact that I'm doing 5 departments, despite the fact that, there's 500 patients in a clinic and I'm the one person doing all the mental health assessments and supervising and doing like all of those things. Right. And I think when you talked about, what are some of the real experiences people have, and when we go back to that word about PTSD and really the ongoing, I really want to be clear that there's so much research that speaks about the impact of workplace culture on your own mental health and wellness. So what does that look like? It looks like the fact that workplace culture can directly be correlated to the experience of PTSD for people, and particularly for people who are continuing to go through that. I have edited the DSM myself, though I'm not on the committee, and calling it ongoing traumatic stress disorder, because you're constantly exposed. So it can look like, honestly, chronic overload is an example of a toxic work culture that can induce post-traumatic stress disorder or stress-induced anxiety or traumatic symptoms in someone. Persistent, unrealistic performance expectations, not giving people the resources and the tools and the mentoring and the coaching and the support that they need to actually succeed at their job, setting people up for failure, walking them into an organization that's failing and then expecting them to fix it, i.e. the concept of the glass cliff, where particularly Black women and other people of the global majority are often brought into failing organizations. And then when the organization doesn't thrive, it's like, well, it's your fault because you are already set up to fail. And so I think those are all the things that we have to acknowledge happening. And it could also be the stress response, because remember, our bodies are not saying, okay, this is work stress and this is my family stress.
Right.
My body is like, this is stress.
Yes.
You're going to have the same symptoms. PTSD is typically connected to having anxiety, intrusive thoughts, not sleeping, not eating, racing thoughts at times, really disturbing thoughts. And they're connected typically to a life-threatening experience, i.e., bombings or, sexual assault, a home invasion, or the constant mass shootings that we experience every day. Those types of things are truly connected to the base of what PTSD is. But your body doesn't say, this stomach ache, this anxiety, this lack of sleep, this cold sweats, this no appetite is because of my job. So that's a different type. We'll deal with it differently. Stress is stress. Stress is a normal response to any demand on your that is placed on your body. On the most basic terms of the definition of stress, it is a response to any demand. Stress, when you decide you're going to run a marathon, you're putting your body under stress. That is a healthy stress if you're training properly. But if you are constantly in a harmful work environment where, your vacation time is getting denied, you're getting targeted, you're overworked, where people are calling you when you are supposed to be on vacation or after hours, or the emails, all of that stuff is under workplace stress. And I also want to be clear, particularly because we're talking about Black women, and honestly, people of the global majority, while stress can happen to anyone, there are certain people who may be more predisposed to experiencing a post-traumatic stress disorder or any anxiety disorders. Maybe if there's a history of mental health needs, such as anxiety or depression, or you're a survivor of abuse or neglect or anything like that. However, people of the global majority and people who are part of marginalized communities are more likely to experience workplace post-traumatic stress disorder, because they are already dealing with the trauma of racism, discrimination, and living while whoever they are. So now you compound that reality, Black woman walking into a workspace that is white-framed workspace, that is based in supremacy culture, that is based in oppression culture, and now being told you are the problem, you are an issue. So now there's the hypervigilance, because I know, even for myself, if I often tell people, even when I'm in meetings, I understand that because I present as a Black woman, your assumption automatically is I am angry and aggressive. I know that. So let me put it out there for you right now.
Right.
But this is just not a possible state, because I am direct. I am passionate. I'm going to be clear about stuff. I don't like BS. I need clear information, because I live between gospel and carnival music. I cannot be mad. But the reality is the assumption is I am. And so I label that for people, because I understand that that's where you are. But I can say to you, that is also a trauma response, because of the exhaustion of constantly having to filter and process my experiences and process how I say through the lens of someone who's going to be angry because I say you're harming me, you're being disrespectful, you're being dismissive. This is not acceptable. This is, why are you making this assumption? Why are you speaking to me like this? Where did this come from? And so when you constantly have to go through that, one of the things that we often do is, because our minds need to rationalize. So we, beyond the fact that we're gaslighting ourselves, we are now questioning, but because we are ruminating or we're stuck on that issue, it's over and over. So now we're talking about compounded trauma, right? Now you're dealing with layers and layers and layers of other challenges. So now, as a Black woman, why are we having incidences of hypertension more? Why are we having diabetes, dying younger, fertility issues? All of these things connected to the allostatic load in our bodies, which we are carrying because of these experiences. So what that does in the workplace, and Shar can jump back in this, is that work performance will definitely be impacted, because you cannot, under that circumstance, function. I tell the brain is the most beautiful gift God has given us. I don't care. No iPad, no Samsung no AI will ever outcompute the brilliance of the human brain and the ability to wire and it will never. But we also know that because we are organisms, we are subject to the environments we're in, and it shapes how our brains respond and how we respond. And we can have long-term implications because of the experience of ongoing stress on our minds and bodies. So you trade your literal life because of these toxic work environments. And that is the impact. And then you will be told you need a PIP. But no one is looking at the fact that you've been targeted and you've been disrespected and you've been dismissed, and that you can't function, that you're sweating and you're nervous to go into meetings, and Sunday night you have belly aches and you're throwing up. All of these things are things that I've heard. I know they're things that Shar has heard as a coach. And, and I know it's stuff that she's heard as an HR professional.
And experienced, right? Like, I've worked at a company where I remember I used to get to the building and be on the floor, and one of the worst bosses I ever had, by the way. And I would have so much anxiety. I would call Claire every morning, and she would have to talk me into walking into the door. So I was in the building already, but just walking into the section of the floor because it was just too much anxiety.
One
thing I want to acknowledge, right? Because we're talking about is HR gaslighting me, right? And again, HR should not be gaslighting you, but we're acknowledging that those experiences are happening because HR people are people. And, we talked a lot last week about, keeping receipts, and again, acknowledging that is overwhelming itself, can have a lot of impact. A lot of what we're talking about today specific to workplace toxicity and resulting PTSD or ongoing stress disorder, as Claire said, can happen to anyone. But like this discussion, Dr. K, your work centers on the experience of Black women.
Yeah.
And recent health, it happens all the time. There's all these research and stats out there, right? Recent health and workplace reports continue to support the need to center what is exactly happening specific to Black women at work.
Absolutely.
McKinsey's 2022 Women in the Workplace report, if you've seen it, highlighted that Black women leaders are more likely to be undermined at work. So we now have a report. And by the way, McKinsey has had this year after year after year, right? So we have all this information. Everyone goes, oh my goodness about this. There's all this fanfare and it dies down, right? But that undermining is whether or not someone is saying or implying that they weren't qualified. And I've had that happen to me, whether that was someone saying, or judging the way that they approach something,
Yeah.
And so it's a lot. And then another section of that report said, Latinas and Black women are less likely than women of other races and ethnicities to say that their manager shows an interest in their career development.
Wow.
So I'm already moving through the world with all of these things against me. So when you spoke about, the training and development, which is development, and that not happening within HR, look, frankly, sometimes it's budget. Sometimes you don't have the team. Your organization may not be structured in that way for all of that. And it's a big undertaking. There are entire learning and development functions at companies that have the money to invest in them that are really there to support the development. They might be creating internal trainings, delivering those. But if you're saying, I want this one HR person to do benefits and to do, to recruiting and to do manage payroll and to, do training and performance reviews, that's one person. You're not going to get the best out of anything, right? So I want to make sure that we're acknowledging that depending on how the organization is structured, even from an HR perspective, it may not be setting up everyone for success because it's impossible to execute without all the support that you need, right? The last two things I wanted to add on these reports, right? Because there's statistics out there, is it's said that, Asian women and Black women are less likely to have strong allies on their teams. So yes. So, a lot of times we talk about, and we've heard, I won't name, but a lot of big name people who've talked about the importance of sponsorship and if a report is saying that Asian women and Black women are less likely to have those on their teams, we're telling people just do A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z is all you need to do. And that's not the reality of what they're experiencing. So I also want to make sure that HR people on the call, other leaders on the call, people who will become leaders, and we're all leaders because in some area of your life, you're leading something, including yourself or someone. It's important to recognize that telling someone who's already dealing with the way that the world treats and receives them and is subjected to that all they have to do is X that may work for a white colleague, that is also gaslighting. Because if reports are showing that Black women are more leaders, are more likely to be undermined, that Latinas and Black women, are reporting that their managers don't have an interest in their career development, that Asian and Black women are less likely to have strong allies, we have to stop telling people just do X and consider their intersectional identities, right? That is something that's really important to understand. Even from the health perspective, I saw, I think Insider published an essay entitled, Black Women Are Worn Out from Discrimination in Corporate America. And they went on to say they're leaving to launch their own businesses. All of us doing that, right? And that's creating a hole for talent across industries. It's like, okay, so we know this is happening. We're saying there's a talent hole, but these experiences like Black and Asian women are having, or the Latinas and Black are having, these are still happening, right? And then in December, Yale School of Medicine published an essay entitled Black Women Excluded from Critical Studies Due to Weathering. And it specifically stated that weathered by a lifetime of racial discrimination, Black women age earlier and faster, and that research has theorized that this accelerated health deterioration is caused by cumulative exposure to race-based stressors and in a race-conscious society. So how, for everyone on this, including HR, right?
Mhm.
How are we expecting people where this is the reality, this is what research is showing, to just show up and
Yeah.
engage and be
Yeah.
okay when they now
Yeah.
start to experience those harms at work,
Yeah.
that are happening even externally. So I know
Yeah.
we're at that time, so we may not get to some of the other questions that
Yeah.
you had, Dr.
But
K.
Charmaine,
Yeah.
you know, when you talk about, you think about the research, right?
Mhm.
You know, just all the research talking about that, you know, Black women, you know, that we have higher rates of experiencing these workplace discrimination or toxic work environments, right? And thinking about that when you tell people who are being harmed,
Mhm.
oh, you just need to do this,
Mhm.
right? You're not honoring that they're being harmed or what
Yes.
is harming them in that environment.
Yes.
The other thing is when you think about, you know, having a community, having support, that is a protective factor to all this other stress. So if we're less likely to have those individuals to advocate for us or to have that training, a lot of the protective factors are stripped away from us, right?
Yes.
And I
Absolutely.
wanted to add that the American Heart Association did research previously too, that Black women are now developing cardiovascular disease at earlier ages, right? And we're dying earlier, right?
Yes.
So when we're talking about this, ladies, right, and everybody watching this, when we're talking about this, it's a matter of life and death, okay? And that we are saying that toxic work environments can significantly harm you physically, mentally, spiritually, right? And we are here, right, to not only bring awareness to this, but also call out organizations and call out those individuals in organizations to be accountable and to be aware of what you're doing, because you may be harming other people.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to be very clear about that.
Yeah.
And I just want to say one more thing before we start opening up for questions and answers and start winding it down. What is so ironic is that you, Charmaine, as a human resource professional, Dr. Claire, as a mental health professional, myself as a mental health professional, right? That we are being harmed by the same environments that we're trying to help other people,
Yep.
right? So just think about the irony of that, which is even more damaging, right? So I want everyone to be aware of and just be self-aware. My hope is that everyone who are watching this, that you are being aware of ways that you may be harmed in your toxic work environment, right? And my hope is that you have a better understanding of HR so that if you do want to seek HR support, that you are more informed, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to open it up now for Q&A, okay? So if you have any questions for Charmaine and Dr. Claire, we will take some time to answer some questions before we start winding down, okay? Because we know this topic has a lot of layers, okay?
Right.
So because this topic is so rich, has a lot of layers, very complicated, we're going to have a part 3, okay? So we'll let you know when the part 3 is coming. So don't feel like, wait a minute, what about this, right? But right now, again, we're going to open it up for if you have any questions or comments, we'll take some, and then we'll start winding down. Now, as we're waiting for that, I'm going to read some of the comments in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? Okay. So a lot of shout outs to both of you, talking about ongoing stress, talking about, you know, just so happy we're having these conversations. They even created a so-called process where they are policing themselves. Do you know what that refers to?
Like, who's the they that's policing?
I don't know. It just, it was just in the, I'm not quite sure. So whoever wrote that, if you can elaborate, that would be great. So we can respond to that question or that comment. Charmaine, thank you for saying out loud that you are not a fan of performance reviews. Absolutely no one looks forward to performance review. No one. It is drudgery, pure and simple. You are so right, Dr. Kamani. My health is suffering due to working in a toxic workplace. And somebody else is like, yeah, this is just, it's all of this impacts us, right, profoundly, okay? Thank you, both Dr. Claire and Charmaine, understanding that HR can be both a tool and a weapon. How can we identify an ally versus part of the system? So that's a good question. How do we identify possible allies?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's the same thing that we do in regular life, right? Who's for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are your spidey senses telling you? But
Yes.
the thing is that demonstrated consistency is how we develop trust. So if you are the same person that you are everywhere, meaning the way, well, let me phrase that, right? I don't think as a person of color, right, part of the global majority, I've never gone to a job and said, I'm going to bring like this whole full self thing. I don't believe in that, right? I just
It's dangerous to do so.
right?
It's dangerous to do so. Yes.
Right. But specific to this, it's who is co-signing with you as a conspirator level. I'm willing to publicly say this with you or call out things like that. White woman at that company that I was thinking of, right? She literally used her privilege to say it out loud. The backseat and side door people that want to IM you, text you, like, I'm glad you said something. I don't have time for that.
Too much of that. Yes.
So those are not your allies. The people who are willing to listen, and you have to be mindful. Sometimes we want to just get it all out. They're not your therapist. Don't do that.
Yes.
Go to your therapist to get it all out. Who are the people that are willing to say, I will support you and actually follow through on it?
Yes.
That's
the action.
Right. And you can start to tell these things in some ways. Do you have a colleague who says, oh, this project, let me stay late and help you with it, and they actually do it? Because if you do, that's someone who is following through on their commitments, they're honoring their word. But people can show up differently depending on the different situations, right? Because if they're now worried about themselves. So don't use that as the only filter, but that might be an indication of their character. And again, consistency is what builds trust. So what consistency are they demonstrating to you that is establishing trust within you? That may allow you to open up a little bit more, see if they might be willing to support you, whether that's writing a letter or saying, yes, I will go with you to report this, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. I think the trust piece is so important, and recognizing that that's now beyond the workspace. It is the emotional piece, right? Because trust is intimacy, right? Trust is building that. But then when trust is betrayed, it's really hard. And so what Shar is saying is that oftentimes, and just the way that we are wired, we often do it because it's human nature. When we're going through a lot, we are doing the verbal vomit, as you know, as alluded to. I call it verbal vomit, and because it's a trauma response. It's like, okay, you got to get it out. I got to get it out. But that trauma took a really long time to happen, or may have happened in a short time. But you cannot process all that trauma in one go, and somebody else can't take in all of that trauma in one go, i.e. really important, again, for the therapeutic spaces and people who value and see you, because you could fire your therapist too if they're not working for you. After you give it a good try. It can't be you fire your therapist because they called you out on your bull crap and now you're like, oh, no.
Holding you accountable.
Holding you accountable is important. But it is really important that the consistency, and are people willing to put it on the line? I call out colleagues all the time for the side allyship, because I always say you want the appearance of not being racist, but you don't want the work of not being racist.
Dr. Claire, can you say that again? Did you say side allyship?
Side allyship. Those are the ones that slide through the back door. Those are the ones that slide in the DMs, do the call after, like, oh my God, you were so great. Oh my God. But they, in the meeting, they're like, yes, I agree with everything you said, but they never come off mute.
Silent.
They never publicly in the email response say, I agree. They will send you a private message, but they will not publicly take the risk. Those are side allies and side allies who go right out the side door with the trash, because I don't want to.
I love it. Yes.
Incredibly, those are even more problematic than the people who think are coming at you, because the side allies is where people get caught up, where they now emote and tell the stuff. Those are the ones that will talk the good talk, but then if an opportunity comes up, they'll take it and not tell you, never put your name for it. You want the people who will bring your name up in the room, even if you are not there.
Absolutely.
Those are those people. And that takes time. And again, something we talked about, can you develop long-lasting friendships through work? Absolutely. But these people are not your friends. You have to understand that.
And a lot of harm comes in that, right? If I think about workplaces that I've had in 2 decades, I can less than 5 fingers for each one. Walked away with people where they got to me enough where I'm like, okay, fine, you broke my shell, and some of those people are on this call right now where the relationship went beyond. So
Yes.
if I think about 2 people, 3 people max, but it's usually somewhere between 1 to 3, but really 1 to 2 that I may develop a relationship with. There's some people where I don't talk to that work with a company, don't talk to them at all, right? So that's the thing. Do we have anything else?
Yeah, we have a few comments and then we're going to wind down. Okay, our questions. Dr. Clarence, Charmaine, can one of you share a time when you witnessed or participated in HR getting it right, addressing a toxic workplace issue?
Absolutely.
My
Absolutely.
sister gets it right. I'm biased, but I will say that if I can use this story, Char, I remember, and I think we probably, because there's so many. I remember years ago, before people were more cognizant and aware of the diversity and beauty of humanity, and Char had explained, there was a person who was transitioning at her job, male to female, and there was a lot of, I think, discomfort. And the thoughtfulness that she had, and this is years ago. So again, before it was, the right thing to do that people recognize was the right thing to just treat people like humans. The level of thoughtfulness that I saw her go through, it's not like she was talking to me about it, but like sometimes I would pass conversations, or just I would see her so concerned as she was pushing back on colleagues who were saying things that were wildly inappropriate, how she was so thoughtful in caring about making this person feel seen while balancing the discomforts or the questions of other people. And this is before resources existed. This is before the information. And so I think there's so many ways. Yes, we've been talking about what goes wrong, but I have an example in my sister of what HR goes right. That's what I told you guys before. She ruined it for me because I compared everything to her and her level of compassion and emotional intelligence and emotional IQ, and her, as you see, we are both nerds in heels because she's pulling in the research. Her taking the time to go deep dives and understand and ask questions of people, not just make those assumptions, and to also push back against the system when it was harming, when she's like, this is against the law, this is not right, and being willing to be the co-conspirator regardless of who people what they look like, who they pray to. I have seen her do that time and time again, and I've seen her do it behind the scenes. She wasn't doing it for accolades. She was doing it because it's the right thing to do. So absolutely have seen amazing HR.
Well, thank you. For everyone on this call, like I don't know what my sister wants with all this extra praise, but I'm
shoes would be good.
I'm just wondering.
I could send you a link to some real cute shoes I saw recently.
I knew there was a cost. So,
yes.
But
can I say something real quick, Charmaine? Can I say something real quick? Yeah, I just want to say something really quick, right? Yeah. So Dr. Claire just showed the humanity and human resources, right? Yeah. And talking about how she's observed you really have a very humane approach in your work. And the hope is that other human resources do that too.
Yes.
Yes, I'm saying.
I've seen it too, right? So, this talk, right? We're not bashing HR. I'm in HR. I don't want the bashing, right? And we said it last week too. HR's employees too, they're balancing a lot and considering their own needs and, their personal risk for doing things. And again, we're ultimately not the decision maker. We're just trying to, we're presenting all the information. But I've seen a lot of amazing HR, right? There's, a company I worked for a few years ago. The team's fantastic. Every single one of us still talks. We were just texting the other day about when can we get together, and one person right now is recovering from surgery, so we should. That was a fantastic team, one of the best teams I've ever worked on, right? So I know it exists, but what we want people to understand on this call is it doesn't always go right, and when it doesn't go right, there are things that you could be thinking about, right? So what should you be expecting of HR when you're experiencing things? You should be expecting objectivity. You should be expecting that someone's going to be fact-finding, right? Looking for the information, asking you if you have information to support it. Sometimes people get upset like, oh, they want me to prove it. Well, if You told the doctor your foot is broken. They're going to say, let me take an x-ray so I can confirm what it is. So don't take it if someone says, do you have anything to support what you're saying as an attack on you personally? They're just looking for that confirmation. But objectivity is one of the things that HR should be doing. Let's do like one or two more because it's,
Okay. So many people only interact with HR when they are hired, in trouble, or leaving. It is really hard for HR folks to gain trust from people if they only see them in these circumstances. This is why HR professionals have to proactively develop trust with employees. Agreed. So just in closing, many people love, Dr. Claire, your comments, and that you should copyright side ally. I agree, Charmaine. I've only had about 3 to 5 friends total that I've consistently stayed in touch with in my 25 plus years in HR at several different companies, right? Okay. So we are going to wind down, everyone. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, for really understanding HR, hopefully have a better understanding of HR, having a better understanding of ways that a toxic work environment can harm you physically, mentally, spiritually, right? And our hope is that by having these conversations, that you are more informed and empowered in relation to HR, have a better understanding of HR. And as we said before, we are not here to vilify HR. We understand that HR is made up of people, right? And as you guys talked about before, there's good people, there's mediocre, and there are some people who are not so good, right? So it's made up of people, but they are employees of the system, right? So we have to understand that. So the next time we come back for part 3, we'll talk a little bit more about if you choose to go with HR, right? How do you really, how are you informed in terms of what is it that you want from HR, and just be informed in terms of what to do, right? So we'll give you a lot more information about that during our part 3. And so I just want to briefly have Charmaine and Dr. Claire share a little bit about their business and how people can contact them.
Yeah. Claire, do you want to go first?
My computer decided to just freeze. So again, Dr. Claire Speaks, and I am really excited. I speak on the intersection of mental health, racial and social justice, DEI, health equity through Dr. Claire Speaks, training, speaking, keynoting, being able to really center mental health and the intersection with DEIJ is something that I truly care about. And it's something that I'm able to partner with Char more through with chapter 2. But I want to leave though by thanking you, Dr. K, for your continued and steadfast efforts to give voice, visibility, and breathe life back into all of the Black women and people who continue to be harmed, to ensure that they know that it's not them, that there is hope, and also that in the places of despair, that those are real and that it's not them, and stop gaslighting themselves. I think it is so important that as we continue to navigate the systems of harm, that we not harm ourselves more by telling ourselves that what we're going through is not that bad and that we should keep staying. And I recognize that it's a place of privilege to move from a job or to quit a job. And sometimes people are like, I just can't leave. I definitely have been there and be there and know all those, that. But I thank you for this, because there's a reason why there's so much momentum around this. And it's sadly aligned with so much of the research, but there's a need to talk about these things, and there's a need to address these until and unless organizations and the organisms in those are held accountable for the harm that they are costing, the life expectancy that is decreasing as a result, the healthcare implications. Mental health is the leading disability in the world, costing over $1 trillion in lost work wages worldwide. That is the cost for companies that don't care about people. That is the cost. And so you are priceless. You are more valuable than anything. And I know sometimes we don't feel that, but there's nothing that could replace the gift and the value of you. No amount of money can replace your health. No amount of money can replace your family that may be lost because of the toxicity. No amount of money can replace your peace or your well-being. And so as we continue these conversations, I want people to really weigh in. What am I risking? What am I trading? And is it worth it? And there's nothing that's worth you. You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. You can put in my whole name and find me. I'm really happy to connect. And I will also pass it to Char so she can explain also in terms of finding. But I wanted to make sure I thanked you, but also wrapped up in letting people know that they're worth walking away from toxicity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that, and just reminding people that we really need to be centering our own needs, and Dr. K for creating this platform to address the specific to, Black women, because like the research and everything we're talking about is really showing the implications. And as Dr. K said, everyone, we're going to do part 3 where we're going to specifically talk about the strategies. So I know all of this now, right? Last week, 2 weeks ago, real talk about HR, talking about gaslighting in HR, confirming that it can happen. Absolutely. And the next time when we wrap up will be, what are those strategies for you to navigate and arm yourself, right? We talked a little bit about some stuff last week, but we'll dive into it. 2 weeks ago, we'll dive into a little bit more, the next time we get together. But specific to chapter 2, chapter2.com, Dr. K will link it in the video when it posts, so you can find us there. Consulting, coaching, training, and thought leadership, just like this, right? Sitting down and talking about these things, right? That's something. Also info@chapter2.com, right? So that's our email address. You can shoot us an email if you want to get in touch about partnering and how we work together. And 2 final thoughts. You cannot heal an environment that is hurting you. Can't happen, right? And if an organization doesn't appreciate your presence, they deserve your absence.
Absolutely.
Right?
Bye.
And it's okay. So,
yes.
And I met someone this week and I told her today, I have to use this. When I said, how are you? She said, I am fabulous because I chase me every day.
Ooh,
and that is the mindset I'm striving for. And that's the mindset that I wish for everyone on here, right?
Yes.
It don't appreciate your presence. They deserve your absence.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to chase you. So thank you everyone for joining and hanging out with us for extra 8 minutes. Really appreciate it.
Thank
you. Again, chapter2.com and info@chapter2.com is our email.
Yeah, so I will include all of the information in the description section when I upload the YouTube channel video. And I just want to say to everyone listening that a reminder is that you are a gift, right? And if people don't acknowledge or appreciate that you are a gift, that is not the place for you. If you ever feel like you have to dim your light, that is not the place for you. If a job is causing you any type of harm, that is not the place for you. You deserve better. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of different things, and Charmaine, Dr. Claire, we all believe you cannot heal in the same environment that's harming you. You can't do it. Okay. So I just want to just briefly say 2 things to you. That number 1, I'm going to have a free training for Black women leaving toxic jobs. It's going to be a 1-hour training. I will put the link in the description section if you want to get on the waiting list for that. So you'll be notified when I'm going to do that. Okay. The other thing is that I do have a group coaching program for Black women healing from toxic jobs, group coaching program. That the upcoming cohort is closed, registration is closed for that one, but I'm recruiting for the next round. Okay. So if you want to get on the waiting list for that, that will also be in the description section. So again, tune in. We'll have part 3. We will be posting when we have part 3. So again, thank you for watching. I hope that you were able to really pay attention to what we talked about today, and you have a more informed understanding of HR. And I hope that you subscribe to my channel, Lifting Us with Climb Consulting, Wellness Services, and also that you share this video with others, particularly other Black women. Okay. So again, thank you for tuning in and stay tuned for our next conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.